What's
It's going to
wrong
be
with
at
betting the Delaware game? There's nothing
what?
wrong with betting that game.
Hawaii. We've done it many times. Yesterday during the break, I heard a story about Hawaii tickets laying on a hotel floor. You know, so I
I've
mean that's
always
what
said this
happens.
about Hawaii, though. It's one thing if you have a slip on Hawaii from the morning. The
Yeah.
problem with betting Hawaii is when you bet right around kickoff. That is when it turns into degeneracy. If you like the Hawaii game on Friday or Saturday morning, that's fine. When you're drunk and chasing on Hawaii because it kicks off at 2 a.m., that's when Hawaii gets to be a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Probably right. Oh, look at this. The first Sunday we get USC, LSU. How do you think those Pac-12 teams? I mean, you've watched Big Ten your entire life, just like me. How do you think these Pac-12 teams are going to be able to adjust coming over? Are they going to go through their struggles? Like you look at the win totals, and it feels like the number makers believe, yeah, they're going to struggle making that adjustment, whether it's climate, travel, style of football, whatever it is, they're going to go through their issues.
USC is going to have a hard time stopping the run because that's been their issue, has been getting guys and developing guys on that defensive line. We shall see how that shakes out. I think UCLA is going to struggle. But Oregon, man, if you look at these markets to win the Big Ten conference, you got Ohio State about 3-2, plus 160, give or take. And then
Mhm.
Oregon is on line two at 2-1. And that's because they have a quarterback in Dylan Gabriel. They've got speed and skill all over the offense. They always have a really good offensive line. Think about the Penei Sewells and the Kyle Longs of the world. Like they have really good offensive players. So if that's the case, Oregon's going to be right there for a Big Ten championship. And I know you saw Brett McMurphy's tweet the other day about the potential of an Oregon and Rutgers Big Ten championship game. I don't know that that's going to happen on the
Oh
Rutgers side
man.
of things, but Oregon's going to be just fine. And look, man, I'm a big fan of Dan Lanning. That guy, in that decision last year to go for it against Washington, even though they lost the game, I love the call, love the aggression. Oregon's going to be just fine. As for USC, UCLA, got my concerns about their defense.
Oregon's going to be better than fine. In the FPI rankings released earlier this week, they put the Ducks number 2 overall, Georgia number 1. They also put numbers for the teams most likely to get a bye. So just to remind everyone about what this playoff format is going to be, 12 teams. The conference champions are going to be 1 through 4. They all get a bye. So they don't have to deal with the first round games, which will be held on college campuses. Then you get to the quarters, semis, championship game. But if you're making title bets, don't you think the starting point on a lot of this is going to be that bye? I mean, what an advantage with 3 potential games as opposed to dealing with 4.
Sure. I mean, it's very important here. And, the more you have to play, obviously, the tougher it is to run the gamut. And that's why you look at some of these sleeper teams. I know we're going to talk about teams to make the playoffs because there are markets available on that. But yeah, you'd much rather be a 1, 2, 3, 4 than be a 9, 10,
Yeah.
11, and 12, especially, when we talk about the likelihood of a team, like let's say Kansas makes the playoff, a big underdog to make the playoff.
Okay.
But Kansas gets in. Kansas is an 11 seed. The odds on Kansas winning the whole thing from the 11 hole are not going to be great. And that's what you understand. But when you're talking about the Georgias of the world, the Ohio States, the Texases, the Oregons, I have my doubts about Alabama with Kellen DeBoer. I think he's a great in-game coach, but recruiting in the SEC is a big monster. It's not like recruiting at Washington. He's got to play that game now. But Georgia, Ohio State, Texas, Oregon, those are going to be the teams that are likely going to get those buys, and then you go from there. But I mean, there are some value pops. A team like Miami plus 250. Miami's got a quarterback now. Cam Ward transfers from Washington State. How about Utah? Can I sell you on Utah and Cam Rising's 15th year of eligibility to go 11-1 maybe and make the playoff? You're going to pay the premium on these big time programs, but I don't think these numbers are right on some of these sleepers, like a Miami, per se, or like a Utah to make the playoff at plus 250, plus 270.
All right, let's go through some of that. It's interesting that the conference certainly matters. Like with these FPI numbers, they're saying that, you know what, Florida State they got a pretty good shot at getting a bye just because of the conference they're in. However, they barely have them in the top 10, but they would be in the playoffs. So, yeah, that's if you're looking for plus money, um, some of the odds on teams, I'm not interested in it. I are you gonna I feel like I've got to put together a parlay at some point before the season starts. Like
There we
we're gonna have
go.
to do
Now
that. We're
scratch
gonna
that. You just got to
yeah,
get that itch and just scratch at it.
make them shake. That's what we're looking to do.
So are you going
What
to bet
about
Florida State plus 130 to make the playoff? It's right there for you.
yeah, probably. Are you
Okay.
on Clemson? Sounded like yesterday you're a Clemson guy. You're a Dabo. We don't want the transfer portal, anti-portal in this day and age. Are you rolling with Dabo? You're going with FSU.
I'm a big Bible thumper, as you know, big Bible guy. Uh, did you see the video, by the way, of Dabo going to the recruit's house and he was like, "Yeah, this is," and he forgot his name, and the kid was like, "Yeah, Brian Jones," and he's like, "Yeah, Brian Jones." And he puts his arm around him. I'm like, God, that was a bad look for Clemson. How did
Uncomfortable.
they not have any receivers? That's my thing. I remember Clemson had guys like DeAndre Hopkins and was it John Ross the one year? I mean, they've had T. Higgins went to Clemson.
Yeah.
Since the portal got really hot, he hasn't been able to land a receiver. And he's had the
No.
quarterback play, right? He had Trevor Lawrence. He had DJ Uiagalelei, who turned out to be a bust. And now he's got Cade Klubnik. But, Joe, they have no speed at wide receiver. And it's almost a stubbornness because Dabo says, well, if you don't commit to Clemson, we don't want you. Bro, that's not how it works in 2024 anymore. You're a receiver or two away from getting back to the playoff. And the number on Clemson to make the college football playoff, plus 185. If they get anything from wide receiver, they're going to have a chance to make it because you know the one thing about Clemson, they continuously have multiple defensive linemen that are going to go to the NFL. They are so
Mhm.
good at finding and developing NFL D linemen. The problem, though, has been the development of the quarterbacks and the, I guess, lack of wide receiver production.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. It's for make the playoff, it's tough to find good value. I think it's going to be fascinating if you get a team that's expected to be pretty good, maybe a quarterback, a coaching staff that you believe in, and they start off with a loss. Like, how are those numbers going to change? Are you going to be willing to come in then? I'm sure everybody's going to be lining up Colorado 14-1 to make the playoffs as Shadur Sanders makes his return. They did well in the portal, but something you also have to consider is, yeah, they added a lot of bodies because they had to. These other teams don't have the space. They don't have the spots, the starting spots that Colorado certainly has. So that's going to be a popular bet just because you mentioned Oregon. You know, what's interesting, these FPI top 5 offenses and defenses, there's only one team that has a top offense and a top defense, both top 3. That's Georgia. That's Georgia. A
Mhm.
lot of these teams, the strength is on one side of the ball, but the Bulldogs are the balanced team, and of course, they've got Carson Beck returning.
Can we have the Michigan conversation?
Yeah,
Because that's
minus
a
120.
team to make, minus 120 to make, plus money to
Mhm.
miss. That's a team that lost a lot. Head coach, quarterback, never a good thing. And also, oh, by the way, 6 starters on defense. Going to be tough to replace that. And we'll see because we saw the interim guy who became the coach, Sharon Moore. We saw him beat up on cupcakes. But here's the Michigan schedule, right? You start with Fresno State at home. Usually, Michigan's playing Eastern Washington State Southwest in game one. And they've played like 3 or 4 bad teams in a row to start their schedules. Fresno State, Texas, 1-2. They both come to Ann
Mhm.
Arbor, but that's not easy. You also play USC at home, at Washington, at Illinois, which is going to be a much better team this year, at home against Oregon, and then you end the season at Ohio State. That is the toughest Michigan schedule of my lifetime. So if you're looking for a team that has the perception of being playoff good that could fall flat, given all the changes and the toughness of the schedule, I'm looking at Michigan, even money to miss the playoff.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty solid look. What? All right, how many Big Ten teams are going to make it?
I'd say 2.
For just 2? That's it?
You think 3? You got Penn State in there?
Well,
Got big game
okay.
James making the playoff?
Well, we got Oregon, right?
I was going to go
You know,
Ohio State, Oregon, and draw the line there.
and not Penn State. So Penn State falls.
I'd put Penn State and Michigan both out. I mean, the SEC is going to get 4
Okay.
teams,
Yeah.
maybe 5.
The Oregon team, they're not going to have as big of an adjustment as those California teams. Just the
No.
way that they play. And of course, you got the top quarterback, like they're going to be outstanding. It's going to be a fun conference championship no matter what happens. I'm going to say 3. If there's going to be a third one, whether it's Michigan, Penn State, duking it out for that final spot. But yeah, no, you're certainly right about the SEC, and that's going to be an interesting part of the conversation. What about Tennessee? They're viewed
Fringe
by
team, for
some,
sure.
yeah, like a top 10 team, according to some. That's where you could find some plus money. But again, SEC, look at the teams that you're going to be fighting with. And it's going to be a numbers game when we're talking about 12. Like, there's going to be a line in the sand. You're only going to be able to allow so many teams from one given conference.
Yeah, I was looking at some of the prices on the SEC teams. I mean, you start with the heavies. Georgia minus 550 to make the playoff. Okay, we're not going to bet that, but they're going to get in.
Yep.
LSU minus 110. Ole Miss minus 130. Tennessee plus 180. Now you got Texas A&M plus 220. We're starting to get a little bit more expensive here. Alabama even money. Alabama's a team, I know I just kind of talked about it, but Nick Saban was so good at playing the game. And what I mean by that is, being at Alabama is not just showing up on Saturday and coaching or being at practice and creating game plans. Being at Alabama and thriving at Alabama is playing the political game and winning these recruiting battles. Because if you think you can just show up to somebody's door and have the Alabama A on your chest and you're going to get all these guys, you are sorely mistaken. So he's going to have a lot of Saban's guys still. I mean, they had, 20 or 25 opt-outs already, including 3 big ones, I believe, to Ohio State. But Kalen DeBoer's success at Alabama is going to be about his ability to sustain recruiting classes. And if he can't recruit with the heavies in the SEC, that team is going to slowly decline because he's got the talent now, and we know he can coach. But I'm curious to see that Alabama win total in 2026 or 2027. Is it 10? Is it 10 and a half? Or is it 9.5? And that's a big difference in college football.
Yeah, there's people that believe in Tennessee. There's people that believe in Missouri. But you can believe in them, but the likelihood is, okay, now you're talking about 4 or 5 teams from that one conference getting in. Like, that's going to be it. Like, people are going to be just like, look, you can't have half the playoff from the SEC. But I'm sure there are years down the road, whether it's this year or not, that's going to happen, Sammy, because you talk about Georgia, Texas, Bama. People have those teams already in right now. And then on the fringe, it's going to be Oklahoma, Tennessee, Missouri, LSU. Like, we're probably going to have 6 one of these years.
It's so funny because I completely skipped over Texas. When you said Texas, I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, yeah, they're in the SEC now. And Texas
Right.
is minus 250 to make the
Yeah.
college football playoff. And they've got probably the number 1 overall pick in next year's draft, not this year's draft. Well, I guess in 2 years. Arch Manning is probably going to go first overall, and he's on the bench right now behind Quinn Ewers. Texas in the SEC just doesn't make sense.
It's weird. This is going to take a full year for me to adjust. Texas and Oklahoma, just saying that. These Pac-12 teams going to the Big Ten, it's going to take a while. It's going to take a little bit. But, outside of seeds 1 through 4, do these conferences really matter all that much? Like that, yeah, that's going to be big to get that by. But it's really about the national landscape. And we're just going to have all these super conferences in the end. We all know that's just how it is. But in the end, I do think it's for the best. You hope it doesn't water down the regular season too much, because that's what's cool about college football. Every single Saturday matters.